welcome to Grow Conversations, your window into the world of medical cannabis here in the United Kingdom. My name's Alex Fraser, and on today's show we have Robert Jappie. Thank you for joining us, Robert.
Thank you for inviting me.
Robert is a regulatory lawyer.
That's right.
Working for Fieldfisher here in sunny London. You might be able to see its grey skies out there. We can see the London skyline from this lovely office. Thank you for having us as well. To say thank you for hosting us for this episode.
Thank you for asking me
on. So it might not appear obvious, I suppose, to our audience why we're here, why we're having this particular conversation. We talk to those who are producing cannabis medicines. We talk to the doctors prescribing it. We sometimes talk to the patients who are prescribed it. How did you end up in this space? How did you end up in the medical cannabis space as a lawyer? I suppose regulatory somewhat speaks to that, but in your own words.
Yeah, look, I was a criminal defence lawyer for 12 years. I started out as a legal aid lawyer in Tottenham, working for a very dodgy legal aid firm there. Lots of violence and drugs and that sort of thing. And as a young man, it's a great job, you know, running around from police stations to courts to prisons. As I got a bit older, I wanted to move into sort of more fraud and financial crime, and I decided to go and study a master's degree, and that's where I started working for a charity called Release. Now, we know Neve and the team at Release, they do some really great work, and I was lucky enough to be working in their legal team for a couple of years, doing lots of policy work and drug policy reform, lobbying, and it was there that the idea of moving into cannabis regulation hit me. So I'm born on 420, so I'm lucky enough to have 420 birthday. Yeah.
That's a blessing and a curse.
Absolutely, you know, well, I
busy.
sort of feel born to do it. Yeah. So
didn't know that.
Yeah. So I was writing an article at Release about 420 and about how it moved across from the US and was becoming a big thing in the UK. This would have been about 2015, I think. And it was almost like a light bulb moment, you know, as there was legalization happening in the US, state by state, first medical, then rec. And I just thought, when legal cannabis comes to Europe, you know, this is going to be big, this is going to be huge. You think about it, US and Canada is combined population of 350 million. Europe is double that, 700 million, you know. So I went back into private practice after my time at Release, but I just couldn't stop thinking about cannabis. And so it was in 2018, I decided I'm going to launch a cannabis regulatory department. At that time, there was a small CBD industry here, but it was growing rapidly. And I had some good timing as well. So when I opened the department, the work started rolling in from these CBD companies. They've been trying to navigate what was a complex regulatory environment with very little help. And then, of course, 7-8 months later, the UK government legalised medical cannabis, much to everyone's surprise, and it just snowballed from there, really. So from the end of 2018, the majority of my practice has been advising medical cannabis and CBD companies and all the ancillary businesses on all the day-to-day regulatory issues that they face. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to be doing that for the last 6 years now.
Brilliant. I think it's really interesting. So actually the parallel to what I was doing at the time in 2015, I was at those 420 events trying to get some attention on the medical issue to ramp up these campaigns, and then very lucky to have been there at that sort of 2018 moment. And I think that there's a lot of us, I suppose, who just, right, timing is everything, I suppose. But the right people in the right place at the right time, and I think that, you know, from what I've seen from your work, it's been, you know, you've been in the background helping these companies navigate, like you say, an incredibly tricky environment. How does that look from the perspective of a UK medical company? What's let's say you're starting from absolute scratch, you know, what sort of work are you doing for them? I presume you'll be, you know, if they're talking about setting up clinics, you'll be helping them liaise with the CQC and making sure is that the sort of thing? Is that
I describe the practice as sort of risk and regulatory intervention, right? So that starts from obviously getting your compliance position in order from the outset, and that will be licensing work, dealing with the CQC, getting the necessary registrations and that sort of thing. But also helping when those regulatory interventions occur. So if the regulators, you know how this business is, it's a heavily regulated, difficult environment for these companies to operate in, and bumping up against the regulators is inevitable, whether it's the MHRA, the Home Office, whoever that may be, sometimes the police even. That's where I provide a lot of assistance, making sure that these interventions are managed properly and these companies can come out the other side, green tick, good compliance position, and they can move forward. I think we all agree The companies that are still going to be here in 10 years' time and who are doing well are the most compliant ones. Yeah, so that's the thrust of it. But also, obviously, it puts me in a position where I have a lot of information, I speak to a lot of people, so I think that's what my clients also appreciate, is the sort of market insights, the intelligence and the information that I can bring to them, as well as the legal expertise.
Yeah, the inside scoop.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how I've harnessed that expertise, I suppose, but I suppose also patients in this space, and that you've come in a very charitable way, in a very helpful way. And you mentioned Release, who've also, so we'll talk about Release My Meds a little bit down the line, but let's lead up into how that came to being. Whilst I'm sure there's all sorts of regulatory issues you might have helped grow with in the background, that's not my sort of part of the business. I'm very focused on the issues that patients see day to day, and you've been incredibly helpful in that, coming in and clarifying, because despite the 2018 law change, despite the regulations being pretty clear, set in stone, you've got the amendments to the Misuse of Drugs Act that enabled the prescribing, what happened in 2018, and we'll talk a bit about the driving regulations and how all of that works later on. But not everybody knows that this law has changed, and that causes a lot of problems for patients. So having someone with your knowledge and expertise to step in has been, enormously helpful. So let's talk a bit about those instances. And I guess before we go into this next section, I just want to preface to the audience that these are the exceptions. I don't want to scare the patients who are watching. We're going to talk about some of the more serious issues that patients come across. I just think it's worth prefacing that these are the exceptions to the rule, and they were highlighting them because it's unacceptable they happen at all. Of course. But we don't want to worry everyone that this is the standard of what patients experience. So let's talk first of all about the police and some of the issues the instances that you see. Can you explain in a nutshell what the general misunderstanding is? Why are we having why are patients having run-ins with the police at all over this prescribed medication?
Yeah, so firstly, I have 12 years experience as a criminal defence lawyer, so I have engaged with the police extensively, and I have quite a strange relationship with them because I know it's a difficult job, and if I was burgled or something like that, I'd call them straight away and I'd want their help, but at the same time, one of the favourite things a police officer will say to a suspect or a detainee is that ignorance of the law is no defence. So when these issues are arising because police officers don't actually realise that medical cannabis is legal, I find that extremely frustrating. It's not that it's been legal for 6 months, Alex, it's been legal for 6 years. So to have this number of incidents happening due to a lack of awareness amongst the police that medical cannabis is legal, I personally find that very, very frustrating. So that's one of the reasons why I'm always happy to give time to patients who have found themselves in this situation, purely because I have that wealth of expertise in dealing with the police, but also it's important, that police are educated about this. I'm sure these police officers don't want to be wasting time on cases like this. It's just, you can imagine the reaction when you tell the police officer actually you're completely wrong about this. And
they don't like hearing.
No, they don't. It's very hard.
I'm not surprised. It shouldn't be surprising, but
it's very hard to admit that you've made a mistake, whether you're a police officer or not.
You talk about that frustration. I think that's what we've definitely, we've been around the space a while. We've known each other for a little while, but we've really bonded over that frustration. And I think we talked about this on some of the past podcasts. But for me to have campaigned for 4 or 5 years for this law change to have happened, to have got that law change, and then to work in the industry and help set up these supply chains and get these medicines to patients, to then have patients still getting in trouble with the law. And like I said, we'll talk through some examples, I think, to give people an idea of what that looks like. But incredibly frustrating.
And look, not only is it wrong in terms of how the patients are treated, it's not good for the industry, right? Because the reality is, from a commercial perspective, a lot of medical cannabis companies, they're not necessarily competing with each other, they're competing with the illicit market. And one of the big selling points for becoming a legal patient is that you are legal and nobody can cause you any problems, whether that be your employer, whether that be your landlord, whether that be the police. So it's important. We're
going to get to some of those other authorities after. But let's talk about some of the instances you've seen from police. Let's start off with the deep end, shall we? What's sort of the worst instances that you've seen police get involved with and this is prescription cannabis patients,
Yeah.
so law-abiding citizens.
Yeah. It's a complete denial that medical cannabis is even legal. So the person who is carrying their pots, their tub, with their legal cannabis in that shows their prescription, has a letter from their clinic, and the officers still say, no, you're making this up. That's completely, it's beggars belief that they have such a lack of knowledge that even in the face of this evidence being presented to them. And what happens is, they take the medication, right? That's prescription medication. And bear in mind, it's not paid for by the NHS generally. Patients are paying for this themselves. So to deprive someone of their lawful medication, put them in a position where they now have to find the money to go and, pay for a new prescription, I think it's just unacceptable. And then to take 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to finally acknowledge that you've made a mistake, return the medication, it's not good.
No.
It's not good at all, and it's those kinds of incidents I find it the most frustrating.
Yeah, we had a young lady, didn't we, that who had a friend who'd recently taken their own life, unfortunately, and was struggling with depression, and had gone for a walk and taken some medication with them, and had run with the police and had their medication taken away from them.
That's right.
And at that, I guess it just really that instance really hammered home, because at that vulnerable moment, taking that person's medication away is going to be potentially hugely impacting in their life.
Yeah, and it took us 2 weeks for them to finally get it back to her. I had another police force recently that refused to give it back altogether, saying it was policy, we don't return medication, and then they offered £150 in compensation so that the patient could buy a new prescription. But again, it took us 6 weeks to get to that point. It's not right.
Yeah, those payments don't come through quickly.
No.
It's completely unacceptable. And do patients get detained? Does that ever happen?
It does. It does. The patients are getting arrested, and I think we'll probably talk about the driving situation. But that's incredibly frustrating. Is having looked closely at the law, I don't see how a patient who is in receipt of a medical cannabis prescription can avoid being arrested when they are given the roadside drug test.
Should we jump straight into that? I think we can come back and talk more about the police and how we deal with that. But let's talk about driving, because it does. I mean, it's still the police that we're talking about with driving, isn't it? So talk us through how the law works currently. I am prescribed cannabis. I actually don't drive at the moment, but I'm actually in the process of getting my license, so I will be driving in a few months. Fingers crossed, touch wood and all that. What is it going to mean if I'm stopped by the police and swabbed? And let's say I've taken my medication last night. I woke up this morning, I haven't taken any medication. What's going to happen? So
there's two offences, two drug driving offences, right? I'll try and do this in as simple terms as possible. There is a strict liability offence, so if the THC content in your blood is over a certain limit, you're guilty of an offence, right? And there's also a second, more serious offence, which is an impairment offence. So not only are you over the limit, but you have been seen to be driving in an impaired way, swerving all over the road or whatever that may be. Now, being a medical cannabis patient, there is nothing that prevents you from being able to drive, right? It's not a condition that you have to notify the DVLA of or anything like that. So having a prescription and being a legal patient is a defence to the first offence, right? So it doesn't matter if your THC content is over the prescribed level, you cannot be found guilty. The problem is you can only rely on that defence as a medical cannabis patient after you've been taken to the police station and had the blood test. You still have to go to the police station, have the blood test, then your defence kicks in. The police will then look at your prescription, they'll look at your letter from the clinic, and then they'll drop the case against you. To me, that's wrong. Right?
Because you're not just getting, you stop to the roadside, you're swabbed, you test positive for THC, you're taken back to a police station to have bloods taken,
that's right.
And then
they'll look
common sense prevails.
That's right, And so even if you're at the roadside and you show them your prescription and your tub, the likelihood, unless you've got a very sensible police officer, is you're going to get arrested. Right? Something needs to be done about that, because that's not right. And I think there are things that can be done. You could have, we used to call it a producer. I don't know if it still happens, but sometimes you get stopped by the police and you're given 7 days to go to report to the police station and show your licence and your insurance. I don't see why you couldn't implement some sort of system like that, saying, right, okay, you tested positive, you show me a document that suggests that you are a legal patient, you now have 7 days to prove conclusively.
Yeah. Get a letter from your clinic.
Exactly. Yeah. Something like that. That would be right. Okay. But we don't have that at the moment. So if you have a patient that perhaps wants to do a legal challenge of that nature, I think there's something to be done there.
Is that how we change that ultimately for the long term? Is that what's the pathway to fixing this?
Look, I think you know as well as I do, there's been extensive lobbying efforts in the UK of the government, both of the previous government and it will continue with this government, to try and improve things, to do some changes that will make things better, not just for patients but for businesses as well. And it's falling on deaf ears. Deaf ears. Drug policy reform is not high on the list of priorities for this government or the previous government. So my view is then the only resource is the courts.
Mm-hmm.
Take a case to the courts, force the government's hand. If you get a judgment in the court, whether it be a judicial review or something of that nature, then the government has to act. Mm-hmm. So yes, I do think there is a strong human rights argument which could be put forward and advanced in court, which would force the government to change the procedure in relation to when that defence can be considered.
And that wouldn't be cheap though, would it, doing that?
It wouldn't be cheap, no, litigation never is. So
that's where we're sort of at, I suppose. That's the juncture we're at.
It is. Who wants to take on the case?
Yeah.
Who wants to fund it? I think it's a fairly easy case to win. It's just getting it up in front of the court. Obviously, the Home Office and the government will be resistant to it at first, but I think once the argument is set out in open court, I think it'll be very, very hard for them to resist it.
Just hasn't happened yet.
No.
So I mean, there's every chance that by the time we release this podcast, something like that will have happened. I doubt it, because the courts don't move quite as fast as we do with our editing, however so that might be. But I think it's not going to happen overnight.
No, it won't happen overnight. But it's a change that is achievable, and I think in a practical sense there are solutions, as I said.
Yeah.
The second offence, obviously the impairment offence, is more difficult, but again it's quite subjective. I've had clients who have been stopped in their car, no sign of impairment, but then they've been given one of these sort of roadside impairment tests.
Fit tests, aren't
they? Yeah, exactly. And again, engaging with the police, it's a nerve-wracking situation. So when the police then put in their statement, this person was sweating, they were shaking, they were probably just engagement with the police rather than...
You're already prescribed for anxiety, you're stopped at the roadside with police,
Absolutely.
Perhaps the police aren't fully informed about the law, all of these things are going to make you very anxious.
Of course.
I always think the impairment thing's really interesting. I just talk about cannabis and tolerance a lot in my role. People are like, well, how do you get by using cannabis every day? Surely you just stoned all the time. No. So if you use it every day, you build a tolerance, it's like a medicine. Use it sporadically, you don't get that. It gets you stoned every time. Yeah. And that understanding. So for me, I mean, I drink coffee much more regularly now, but for a long period when I wasn't as well enough, I couldn't drink coffee, and having a cup of coffee, which I do occasionally, would give me the jitters, and I'd be all over the place. And the idea that I would drive there, I'd be terrible. I wouldn't be able, I wouldn't be able to play snooker or do anything. I'd be. What impairs you is so. Yeah.
Of course, and there's lots of people out there taking opioid prescriptions as well that will have an impact on their ability to drive. But
we don't stop them driving.
No, please don't.
And we don't arrest them either.
Exactly.
We actually don't swab for opiates, which is interesting. We swab for cannabis and cocaine, and that's purely to do with the prevalence of people testing for those drugs. Is that people don't test. I suppose because you're not testing, you don't know. But I presume the decision was we won't test for opiates because the vast majority of people taking them are prescribed.
Yes,
and it's very unusual that someone who isn't prescribed is going to drive.
Absolutely.
But it's odd to me that they don't test for anything else. It's just those two.
Yeah. Look, it is strange, but like I said, there is a way to try and fix this issue with the first offence in particular. So hopefully we'll find the right avenue to get this change effected.
Maybe we need to go back to release and set up a second campaign. Let's talk about the first release campaign because it goes back to the sort of the more general topic of the police here. So it was like we bonded over this frustration. We have been routinely trying to help patients who, essentially, I come in, patients had a run-in with the police, they've had their medicines confiscated, they come to me and because they found me on social media and they say, how can you help me with this? And I'll send an email to the police saying it's all legal, and the police will be like, well, who are you? And I'll say, well, all right, here's Robert, here's a lawyer, and then you'll give them the thing and they'll be like, oh, okay. So that's the sort of the the quickest and easiest explanation of what we do.
Yeah.
But that happens so many times,
Yeah.
and like, well, this is we're mopping up, really, aren't we? The spillages aren't getting any less.
Yeah.
It's just getting more and more work for you, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm in your emails and I'm in your WhatsApp every few days saying, I've got a patient coming your way, and I appreciate your patience and your generosity with your time on that. But Release My Meds is about trying to resolve this in the long term.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through about how that works?
Yeah, so I mean, look, first thing I say, it's sad that you need me to send that email, because let's be frank, you probably know the regulations better than I do, Alex. But
I don't have a law
no,
degree, unfortunately.
it's those, yeah,
I'm not
exactly.
going to get one anytime soon.
And look, the reason I'm always happy to provide supports to patients is, you know how this sector is, right? You ignore the patient community as your peril, and I think you do a great job engaging with them online and in person as well. And that's why I always want to be helpful if I can. Where there are limits is when a patient says, I want to sue the police, or I want to bring an action against the police. That's a very lengthy process, and it's very specialist. I'm not a lawyer that does actions against the police. There are lots of good law firms out there that do, and in some cases legal aid will be available. So I will always try and push someone in the direction of a specialist if I can. But if it's a case of a couple of emails or a letter and hopefully solve the situation, then I'm always happy to do that for free. In terms of Release My Meds, I think it was our response to just the sheer volume of reports that we were getting, right? And it's not necessarily just engagements with the police. It is people being refused entry into venues. It is, issues with landlords, as we discussed.
Yeah.
And effectively, we believe that the way medical cannabis patients are being treated is likely to be a breach of the Equality Act. Right? The Equality Act 2010 has specific provisions in place to protect people who have disabilities, but also people who are receiving treatment and medication at the direction of a doctor. Yeah. So any attempt to deprive someone from either having their medication or being able to consume their medication is problematic under the law. And we have this phrase, reasonable adjustments. Reasonable adjustments have to be made in order to allow people to take their medications. And that's not happening at the moment, right? We obviously know that patients are advised to consume their medication through using a vaporizer, right? It should be possible for any venue, any event, to make reasonable adjustments which would allow patients to consume their medications.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just asking to be able to use the smoking area.
Exactly.
Or if there's a room, if the smoking area doesn't have a smoking area, that there's a room or a closet or a staff room that they can go in for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it does happen. I mean, the venues are often very, they quite often allow that to happen.
Yeah.
So that's why it's frustrating when landlords don't.
Yeah.
But so Release My Meds is trying to record this and the scale of it, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's there's a law firm we've engaged, Lee Day, that specialises in these types of public law actions against the government, against the authorities, particularly where there are potentially a lot of claimants, right? And there's strength in numbers. So the idea behind Release My Meds is if we can pool all of these issues, all of these stories together in some sort of group action, then it's likely that the Home Office, the government, will have to listen. Right? It's not. We're trying to demonstrate it's not the occasional issue here and there. This is a problem, and it's easily resolved. Right? Some guidance to the police nationally, to venues nationally. It is just a case of raising awareness, I think, and I think if we can get enough of these stories together and build a case of that nature, it could have a real sort of positive impact nationwide. Not just on, as I said, engagements with the police, but also allowing medical cannabis patients to live their lives and go to entertainment venues, go to events without being hassled about.
To have the same protections as any other patient, any other medication.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, we're in this, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I suppose with Release My Meds, where we want to see enough reports that we can do something about it, but also every report that comes in is a disappointment. So we don't want to see patients getting in trouble with the police, but we know that if we get enough of these instances reported and logged, and I suppose that's what Release My Meds is doing, where we were mopping those instances up and resolving them and moving on, we would, eventually lose touch with those individuals, and that would go to one side. What Release Momentum is doing is keeping a log of all of these individuals, their contact details.
Yeah.
So it's, I suppose, and we'll put links in the description and on the screen and all those things. But if you have had any instance with the police or any authority in relation to prescription cannabis medicines, do go to it's release.org.
Yes.
And then in the menus they've got Release My Meds, but we'll put a link in so everyone can get that. But really important that anyone that has happened to reports it. You're not signing up to be involved in legal action. It's not anything where you're tied in. You have to do anything. It's just an opportunity to.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. It's just an opportunity to log what's happened to you and be part of that bigger narrative and maybe later down the line be a part of some bigger change.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. Like I say, for me that. It gives that frustration a place to go. It means that every time this is happening, it's not just frustrating. There is a silver lining that we may be able to resolve this in the long term if people keep reporting it. So
absolutely,
we will see what happens with that. We released that on your birthday, in fact, this year on 420. So it's not been around very long. Do you think we're seeing more of those instances, particularly with police and confiscations?
I haven't seen. I think
it still goes up and down, doesn't it? I find
it does. Sometimes it's hard to believe, right? It's hard to believe. It's like it's 2024, guys. How do you still not know about this?
It's seeping through. I think that's partly where I'm leading with this, and I think more police are aware.
I hope so.
And I think we are seeing less of these. But then every time I have that thought of, maybe we're done with this. Maybe it's died down. Maybe everyone's kind of clued up. Another one will pop up, and we'll be in that same situation again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, back to release.
Look, we have to keep going. Well, I agree with you. I do think we are making headway. It's just still hard to understand how 6 years after legalisation that this can still be happening, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's I suppose it's positive as well that we, as various industry groups, we get some engagement with from police. So with Integra clinics, we've done some education sessions. Actually at IPS, at the pharmacies, so we show that police force around the working cannabis.
And that's great. Education is the name.
And the penny drops at a certain point where they see the level of regulation, the level of the amount of paperwork we have to do just to prepare someone's medication to go out, and we talk them through that whole process, and they see how that's all done and labelled and everything. I think
it's good.
It legitimises that in a big way.
Sure.
We've also been invited to, I'm going to get this wrong, the ACDPLO, which is the Association of Controlled Drug Police Liaison Officers.
Okay. And
they have a regular meeting this month, and we're going to go do some education with them, myself and a prescribing clinician, and there's another one that's which is drug education, drug expert witness, something association.
Okay.
So hopefully we're getting this work messaging out and this running up. But
that's probably that last one is probably a really good one, because one of the big issues that we face in criminal cases of cannabis is these police officers who've had training to be a drug expert. Yeah, what does it mean to be? I was going to say, because I'm doing this conference, but I'm not entirely clued up. What does a drug expert witness do? What is the So where it usually comes into is valuations, right, or the legal status of a product.
Okay.
And having a police officer holding themselves out as a drug expert can be problematic, right? Because the valuations that they come up with are just crazy sometimes, right? They just make no sense.
Well, this is where they sort of find a person who's been growing so many plants that they claim it's a street value of 20 times what it actually does.
I had a case where the valuation that was put on the amount of cannabis was found would have meant that whoever was selling it on the street was selling it for £80 a gram. And I was like, this is absurd. And these valuations can have a big impact. Let's say if it's a decision on whether someone gets bail, inflating a valuation of the amount of cannabis found could cause someone to be remanded in custody. So it's a big problem, and I think that is really important to educate these officers that medical cannabis exists. Give them real information on street values and the cost of things. I think is really important.
I'm going to come and get some tips from you before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get your expertise on that one. Let's move on a little bit from police. Let's talk about employers. I don't see employers as being the biggest issue that we have, but we do see issues, don't we?
It's
around that reasonable adjustments thing again, isn't it?
Yeah, again, this is the thing. Employers are starting to become more aware that medical cannabis is here and it's happening. And as numbers increase, more and more people will end up working with someone who has a prescription. And that's the great thing about medical cannabis. It's empowering a lot of people to go back into the workplace and feeling they can manage their conditions very well. When there is an issue, it's less damaging to a person than, say, an interaction with the police, because what companies tend to do is they panic, and they say, right, we're putting you on paid leave until we can figure out what we're doing about this. You know, so when someone, it's not ideal to be sent home for 3 months or 6 months, but as long as you're being paid, the impact on your life, is lessened, right? What I would like to see, and I think it's inevitable as medical cannabis patient numbers go up, is for these companies to understand they don't need to panic like that. And in fact, sending someone home to be paid for not doing anything for 6 months is costing them more than making the reasonable adjustments that would be needed, to allow someone to vaporise outside or to take a break or something like that.
What do patients need to do once they get a prescription? Do they need to tell their employer anything? Is there any obligation to do any of that?
If it's not in your contract, then no. Your medical history, your medical situation is private information. There will obviously be certain types of job where it is a requirement, and that needs to be stipulated in a contract. So that's it. Check your employment law contract. If there's nothing in there that requires you to tell your employers about medications which may cause impairment, then no, you don't have any duty to disclose it.
It's going to be driving, taxi work, things like that,
heavy machinery, that sort of thing.
And construction.
Absolutely.
No, that's good to know. That's really good to know. And I think really important. I think a lot of people presume that cannabis might fall under the sort of drugs part of their contract, which is, I hate the terminology confusion. You just use the word drugs. What do you mean? Do you mean medicines? Do you mean illegal drugs? And just make sure that you're following the part of the contract. Prescription drugs.
I think that's what we're all working towards, is to stop thinking of it as a controlled drug, but just to keep putting it at the forefront of your mind. It's a prescription medication, and it should be treated like any other prescription medication that you are receiving at the advice of a doctor. It's no different.
Let's talk about housing. I think it's the last of the authorities that had police, driving, employment and housing. Big four sort of authorities we see issues with. What I see in the housing situation is nearly 99% of the time it's a nosy neighbour, and they smell cannabis, and they report that patient to the landlord if they're in a shared space, if they know the person who owns their property in the next door. These are relatively simple to clear up, would you say?
Yes, but it can be a big headache. If you have a neighbour who is causing a problem with the landlord, with the housing association, then it's a big headache to deal with. But you're right. Usually it comes down to the smell. And again, there are lots of reasonable adjustments that can be put into place to mitigate those issues, right? So vaporising your medication, ventilation, all that kind of stuff. It should be possible to resolve these issues fairly quickly, but again, neighbours can be persistent, and housing associations or landlords may not be always sympathetic. So again, it's important to know your rights, and you have the protections of the Equality Act once again.
So you cannot be evicted.
No.
Housing associations do seem to be being tricky in certain situations. I don't know if you've had any. I've had a few interactions with them. I won't name the area, but there's one area with 2 patients that basically were refused housing by the housing association, and I don't think they had the money to fight it. So I don't know quite how that.
Again, it's a lack of knowledge and a lack of education. Just as we were just saying, it's that distinction between consuming a drug and consuming your prescription medication, right? And I think most housing associations they have money and they have lawyers. If you put it to them in the right way, very clearly, that this is an Equality Act issue, you're discriminating against me, they'll take advice, and they should reverse their position very, very quickly. It's just a case of making them understand the situation. This isn't me saying I want to take drugs on your premises. This is me saying I want to consume my medication as my doctor has advised me to.
And you shouldn't really have to divulge what medication you have. It's only it's always reactive, isn't it? There's no stipulation that I'm aware of in housing contracts where you'd have to tell people about medication you're on.
No.
Private information, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We have had some really positive cases in housing. We had one person that this neighbour would not stop complaining about the smell. So the landlord paid up front for more ventilation and basically making sure that the smell wasn't. I think it was filtering through from one apartment to the next because of the way the ventilation was set up. So fair enough, and they rerouted all of that. And I suppose my point being the cost of if there's something needs to be done to amend that, that's on the landlord, not on you.
Well, and as we discussed, it's their legal obligation. Reasonable adjustments, that's what the law talks about. If reasonable adjustments can be made to resolve the issue, then they have to be made.
We've even had patients call the police on neighbours who have been harassing them repeatedly. And then you have to, sometimes the police don't know the full law, so you have to explain the police what the situation is in order for them to tell the neighbour to basically back off and leave them alone. But they do, usually that works out.
That situation should improve things, but we were discussing earlier, it could go the other way. But look,
I think patients are really fearful of, basically they're in possession of potentially large amounts of cannabis and they're calling the police to their house. That could go two ways, I think, as we've spoken about. But actually on the housing thing, when it's a neighbour that's being abusive or harassing them, the police nearly always are very, very helpful. I've not seen anybody, when the police are called to deal with something, they don't start diverting to, but you've got cannabis on you. They don't make a big deal out of that.
No, absolutely.
Even I've seen that sometimes with illegal cannabis, where they're just, they might smell something and just be like, we won't talk about that, but you've got something more serious going on, so let's get that squared off. That's your experience generally. Everyone can have disputes with their neighbours, whether it's about cannabis or not. It's about being sensible and getting it resolved in the right way. And police will generally want people to leave each other alone. They don't want to. They want to just resolve them.
That's right.
You mentioned the smell. I think it's key, isn't it? Do you think the issue is flower? Is the cannabis flower?
Yes, I think it holds a unique position as a medication, right? What other medication is the look, the smell, the taste importance to a patient, right? And that's a wider issue for the whole industry, is how do you engage with the regulators on this basis? When you go to your doctor, your GP, to get antibiotics, you don't say, I want this type of antibiotic, or I don't like that one, or anything like that. The doctor just gives you what they give you. With medical cannabis, it's not like that. It's different. There are different strains that have a different effect on everybody. You and I could consume the same thing and it affect us differently. So there is, it's a completely unique medication, and unfortunately, the government doesn't have any sort of inclination to create a bespoke regulatory environment for it. Just shoves it into an existing one that isn't a great fit, and we've all got to make it work somehow. And that's pretty much summarises what we've been talking about this whole podcast, isn't it? That we're still, cannabis doesn't have its own regulatory framework. No.
Would you like to see that? Would that be something you'd be an advocate for? Do you want it? There's sort of two trains of thought there, isn't there? Where one might say, no, we should treat it like other medicines and not make exceptions. But do you think there needs to be some exceptions made for it?
I would like to see it eventually. I don't think it's necessary if we have education and awareness. Right, we're getting to a nice point now where patient numbers are increasing. Once we start getting into serious numbers, you'll be in a position where everyone will know someone that has a medical cannabis prescription. Once you're in that situation, then hopefully the stigma starts to fall away, and you don't have these extreme reactions to someone divulging that they are a patient. So it's not necessarily we need specific regulation, we just need understanding, awareness, knowledge, that there is.
It sounds like an easy ask.
It
it's
does.
Not, though, is it?
Does.
Unfortunately, it's been years.
But you have to remember, we're up against decades and
yeah.
decades and decades of cannabis stigmatisation, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're fighting.
Misinformation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right, and it is frustrating, but it's fascinating and really satisfying to see that breaking down.
Yeah, and I get it here. In when I join a firm or I speak to people and I tell them what I do. Don't be a dope. Don't make a hash of it. All of the jokes happen, and
do you get asked if you can get samples?
Yeah,
every single
everyone
person
outside of the industry says, "Oh, do you have any samples?"
Yeah. So like, no, I'm just a lawyer.
Yeah.
Why would I have the samples?
Yeah, even if I did, I wouldn't give to you.
Keep them for after the legal meetings.
Yeah. So that's it. It's this stigmatisation that causes a lot of the problems, I think.
Do you think people realise that those jokes are built by a part of that? I think that, yeah, I don't make a point of it every time, and a little part of my brain goes, maybe you should. But every time someone makes a silly joke like that, I'm like, no, this is serious. This is, I woke up this morning and the first conversation I had was with someone who's going through chemotherapy, who's been told they're going to die in a number of weeks and months, and they want more relief for their pain and nausea. People who have multiple sclerosis who are really struggling with the deteriorating health. And then you go to work and someone makes a joke about hash or some silly things.
But look,
you can't fight every little thing, I suppose.
It's getting better for me to be at a firm like Fieldfisher. Fieldfisher is a big European law firm. They have a big life sciences practice. They were getting lots of cannabis-related inquiries on medical cannabis and CBD, and they saw the value in bringing in a specialist. And I think that's great. I'd like to see more big law firms getting involved in the sector because this is important stuff.
Do you think, if there's anything, I suppose you sort of hit the nail on the head of it, but if there's anything you'd say to your colleagues about this space, don't misunderstand it, what would you say to to those who are not aware, I suppose, and maybe you're watching this for the first time and getting an understanding of what medical cannabis means in the UK, what would you say to them? Yeah, look,
it's a conversation I've had here. When I arrived, one of my colleagues very politely and very nicely explained to me how my industry, cannabis, was a tiny speck of dust compared to the pharmaceutical giants that they represent.
Yeah.
But the truth of it
Maybe
is...
true.
Of course it is right now.
At this particular time. And
he didn't mean it rudely, or I didn't take it the wrong way or anything. It was true. But the reality is we know there's anything up to 1.5, maybe even 2 million people in this country self-medicating with cannabis from the illicit market. There is no reason why we shouldn't be able to move a large percentage of that cohort across to the legal market. And that's when you can get to 200,000 patients, 300, 400, 500,000 patients. That's a serious thing, right? That's a serious...
that's a tipping point.
It is a tipping point. And then when people start to understand the benefit that patients being able to manage their conditions using medical cannabis brings, the jokes will stop.
Yeah, I always talk about it just in terms of this. And there's a lot of divisions between medical and recreational, and do we do decriminalisation? Where do we, as advocates, particularly less so industry, but as advocates, where do we spend our energy and our time? And I actually think it's all one side, and the other side is the stigma. It's the judgment. It's the people who aren't aware that cannabis can be good some of the time for some people, and that just breaking that down will do more for those other areas, decriminalisation, recreational markets. I think those things will come quicker because of the success of the medical market, for the reason you explained, which is that normalisation of it being something that helps people and enables them to live their life, not something that impairs and leaves them on the sofa.
Absolutely, and let's be frank, we'd all like to be in a situation here like they have in Canada. But Canada had legal medical cannabis for what, 20 years or more?
2001, 2003?
15, 20 years before they went to adult use. So we're still very early stages here.
In California is similar, right? How was the time? So I think 96 was medical, and then they legalised in 2017, 2016?
Exactly.
It was South Colorado, wasn't it? It's 2016.
And it's that 10 or 20 years of having a legal medical market which helps break down the stigmatisation, because it's been demonised since the 30s, since the 1930s, right?
Yeah, soon may it come. Can't come soon enough, especially for those patients who we've been called in, you've been called in to help and support. So I guess on behalf of all of those, I'd like to say thank you for all the work that you do helping and supporting patients, because it's hugely important, and we've covered why. And
I'm happy to do it. I just wish I could do more. I wish I could do more. I feel frustrated myself when I know someone's got a good case and a good action, but I'm just not in a position to assist.
But like I say, imperative that we have legal professionals like you waiting in the wings for when those moments occur. And I know there'll be a lot of patients watching this who will know you and have benefited from the help that you've given, and many more out there who feel reassured to know that there are people like you that are on hand, if and when.
Sure.
And we did say, these are the exceptions to the rule. They're not our everyday. I do talk to patients who bump into the police and have a lovely conversation and get on with their day. They go, I'm prescribed cannabis, lovely.
That's fine.
You carry on going off the shops or whatever. And
it is a small minority.
It is, but it's a serious issue that needs resolving, and I'm really happy that. So and thank you for being here with us and chatting about it in such detail. We'll hopefully we'll come back and we'll do another episode in a couple of years, and maybe we'll at 500,000 patients might be a bit of a pie in the sky, but we'll see where we're at and we'll see if that stigma's broken down.
No, that'd be good. You know, that's where we want to get to.
Oh, thank you, Robert. I
No,
appreciate it.
No,
Yeah.
my pleasure. Thanks, Alex.
Cheers. And thanks everyone for watching. It's been great conversations, and we'll see you very soon.